of course, unmuted. Great way to start the show. Yeah, this is already turning into a fabulous show. If you are in the path of Hurricane Ian, or if you were, I hope that you are very safe. I realize that this is a pretty tough weekend for a lot of people. Please, please, please be safe. Um, I am your host, Jen. This is TV Dinner. So, we are going to talk about the book to series adaptation. What works, what doesn't, why in recent years I think there has been such an uptick in making series from book ideas and not quite as many movies. Interesting kind of little segue there, which I feel like we can definitely dive into. I also want to talk a bit tonight about what makes a good adaptation for a series from a book. I Because I also feel like in recent years it has been all over the place. We have had some really excellent ones, and then we've had some really, I mean, nice try ideas, but the execution was just absolutely terrible. So where they went wrong, yeah, we'll armchair warrior this a little bit and see if we can get to the bottom of it. I am joined tonight by Josh and Betty. Betty, how are you, first of all?
I'm doing great.
I hear you survived the hurricane as well. I know you're in Florida.
I mean, we just have to worry about surges right now, but since it's North Florida, but I'm sure everything will be okay.
Well, good. I definitely am glad that you made it through. And Josh, also in the wild, wonderful place of Florida. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm so glad you guys both maintained power. I was have to say that I was actually a little bit I don't know, conscientiously aware that you might lose power. That seems to be the first thing that happens here. We even in some gusty trade winds will get the power tripping off. So I'm really glad that you guys didn't have to deal with that. That's awesome. Um, I'm not going to do sort of my regular opening sequence, and I'm going to launch right into a couple of questions. Um, and these are sort of subjective, so feel free to answer them however you like. Uh, First thing is, when you read a series, can you see them on television? Like, can you see sort of the ideas put forth in the book inside of an episode by episode narrative? Because I had a really good conversation with someone very recently who said it's always surprising when I see people do this because I don't think about it that way. I do. Me personally, I do. When I read a book, I am seeing the entire production in front of me, but apparently not everybody does. So I'll ask you, Betty, first. What do you think?
I mean,
Uh,
I don't know if I would specifically say I watch it. I can see it in series, but I can definitely see everything playing out in my mind. So I can see
so,
what the characters look like and what I think they're doing and things like that.
so as a follow up question to that, then, do you ever feel let down by the adaptations as they come on TV based on what you thought it was going to be, what your connotations of the characters, the settings, the just everything in general. Do you ever feel like, maybe this wasn't what I was thinking it was going to be?
Yes, because I know it's not a television series, but the one that really got me was Hunger Games because I really wanted it to be I wanted it to be I can't remember what I wanted to be Haley Steinfeld. I thought she would have been a really great Katniss,
Oh, you
and
wanted her to be Katniss.
I thought she would have been a fantastic Katniss. Um,
Hmm.
but she also probably wouldn't have been in this new Disney Plus show now, so or in Dickinson. But I thought when I envisioned the book, when I read it, that's who I imagined.
Okay.
And that was I
Um,
still to this day will argue about how she should have been Katniss.
I actually had a lot of uh, I had a lot of difficulty with the Hunger Games as it was presented, but no, not but. And I kind of hope that that never turns into a series because I don't feel like anybody can really do that the kind of justice that it needs to have done to it. But I digress. Josh, what about you?
Oh, all the time. Whenever I read something, I'm always casting in my head the characters. Of
Hmm.
course, I don't think that's unusual. Every once in a while, I'll be reading and even have a director in mind, thinking, yeah, this is the kind of tone, this is the kind of imagery that it would look like on screen, and I just have it all playing out in my head. And as far as being disappointed, it's constantly. Although there are cases where they'll bring in a casting decision, for instance, that will take me by surprise. Right, going to the movie example, Heath Ledger as the Joker. It's like, wait, what? You see him represented in book form, whether they're comics or novels, over the years. The Joker, and that was never an instance that ever you know popped into my head. Or if you want to talk strictly TV, Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, Count Olaf with Neil Patrick Harris. I was like, but he's Neil Patrick Harris. He's a suave, dapper dude. Everything Count Olaf's not, but amazing.
That actually is one of the shows that I wanted to talk about tonight because I feel like that is one of the episodic instances of a series of books that did it really well, despite the fact that they changed up a bunch of things. They did change quite a few things, but they made it feel incredibly engaging. And it felt like they did a lot of things by design to be more entertaining. But before we jump into that one, I'm gonna ask, and I can't remember if either of you watched Sandman, the Netflix series. Did have either of you watched it?
No.
No, I started it and then I keep forgetting it exists.
Okay. Well, let me give you little my little spiel about what I think Sandman did for adaptations in the book to series crossover. For a very long time, people have been readily engaged in seeing their favorite works brought to the little screen, to the big screen too, but to the little screen especially now. And I kind of think that in some ways, we've been forever changed by our COVID experience. And we're looking for things that we can do at home almost more than we are looking for things that we can do out. Now, I don't think anything will necessarily make us not want to see things on the big screen. Some instances of grandeur in narrative storytelling absolutely belongs on the big screen. But for a lot of people, myself included, the series is such it's a longer format and you can tell a bigger story. I mean, that goes without saying. But here's the problem, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight about the whole book to series conundrum, if you will. The book to series conundrum is very much dependent upon the streaming services or the production groups that take them on and whether or not they're willing to see them to any kind of fruition. And let's be honest, a lot of the book to series shows that I see begin with sort of a faithful representation of whatever the story is, but then they sort of meander, and the meandering causes problems because it never feels like there's an actual end game sort of in mind. And fans get, I think, a little bit too distracted by, will this series go on and on and on, instead of, will this series get a faithful representation of the books as they were told. Now, one, and there's two ways to look at it, but I'm going to start with one and then I'll finish with Sandman. One is Wheel of Time. Have either of you guys, Josh or Betty, have you seen Wheel of Time at all?
It's on my to-do list for
I
sure.
have not. I haven't heard of that one actually.
Okay, well, Wheel of Time is it was written by Robert Jordan, right? And it's sprawling. The world is absolutely sprawling. In fact, I'm it's hard for me to even like put into words how big the Wheel of Time world really is. It's 13 books long. It is absolutely massive in its inception and then in its execution. Robert Jordan, to me, is like one of the unbelievably best fantasy writers of our time. Um, he died a while ago, but amazing, amazing career and amazing body of work that he gave. Okay, so Amazon has Wheel of Time as one of its projects, and season one aired last year. And truly, it was amazing. I mean, I powerfully amazing. They changed quite a bit. And at first I railed against it and thought, why did you do that? You didn't need to do that. Why not just faithfully tell the story as it is? And then I started really listening and watching and understanding that the storytelling that they were doing merges all of the stuff that I love about Wheel of Time into something that has, I think, a better format for television. So happily, that piece is all coming together. It's awesome. But now let's jump over to Sandman. N- Robert Jordan, obviously, he's gone. So, there's nobody from Robert Jordan's estate necessarily giving artistic vision to the project Wheel of Time. But let's jump over to Sandman. Sandman, and I'm going to preface this by saying that I think Neil Gaiman was a little bit surprised by the artistic endeavor that was American Gods. American Gods lost its platform, tried to find another platform to be told on, lost its writing crew, lost I mean, it was a jumbly, crazy mess. And they tried to maintain integrity in the writing process and in the production process, but it was just too messy. And audiences didn't like it, and it started to lose steam. The story itself is amazing. American Gods is one of those stories that's like, once you read it, you can't forget it. But it's a single book, and they went off and made three separate seasons out of it. And it still needed another one because they haven't even gotten to the end of what needed to happen, which is this big, huge battle. Um, so I feel like Neil Gaiman was kind of affected by that. Like, hey, that wasn't the best experience, excuse me, experience to have as a writer, watching my work come to the screen in this format. And he ended up then being incredibly involved on a totally different level, like a granular level, with Sandman. And when you watch Sandman, it's a little bit like, excuse me, watching the pages of the novel, which most of it is the graphic novel, right? Come to life on the screen. Like the stage direction basically takes its cues from a storyboard that was already written for the graphic novel. So they didn't even basically need to storyboard it, it's just there. Now, and it translated on screen, it translated to an amazing story that feels faithful to the actual material, And while they made a bunch of changes to who the principal players are, that is like what they look like, where they how they dress, what they kind of what their expressions are and stuff, they maintained the integrity of who the characters were. And that's what I feel like the fans are looking for, not necessarily
I'm
just
wondering, do you think that
yes.
he had that written into his contract? Because that doesn't usually happen. Usually
It
they just ruin it and don't care.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And this is okay, and so we'll segue at this point then into Game of Thrones, which is where I think everything went off the rails a little bit. Because yes, Neil Gaiman, part of the reason that Sandman is so successful, I think, in terms of it being a good story and being a good production, is he had so much control over what was said, and that was part of the original contract. Okay, so let's jump over to Game of Thrones. The opposite thing seems to have happened at Game of Thrones, where George Martin sold the rights to this fantasy epic being told. And don't get me wrong, the world is a richer place for having had Game of Thrones be a part of it. I mean, our entertainment world is a totally different experience now because of Game of Thrones, because of A Song of Ice and Fire. We we got a lot out of it, but it was unchecked. It was unchecked by the author, and that's usually what happens. You sell the rights to a story and you no longer retain the rights to your story. At that point, it's not like you're getting creative control out of anything. And so, okay, so here's my next question. And I realize that some of these questions might be a little bit technical, but if you can answer them, be my guest. Do you think that this is sort of the crossroads of where we're at? Now, I actually, let me back up here. House of the Dragon, George Martin has had a lot of influence in. He's an executive producer, and he also has some creative chops in there. So there's a lot more in House of Dragon that seems like it reflects George Martin than perhaps Game of Thrones did, because Game of Thrones was two guys off in a writing room doing their thing, which I do think that they did successfully up until the last few seasons. um, but there wasn't George Martin sitting in the room or on the other end of a phone going, "Hey, we just wanted to check in. What do you think about this or this or this?" Whereas Sandman was like that. Okay, so here's the question. Do you think that this is the direction that we're actually going in? Are we going in the direction of, if you create these big worlds that you then want to bring to the screen, do you feel like this is sort of it's going to be one of the responsibilities of the author to also be sort of in creative consultation with the with whoever the series creators are, with whoever the series showrunners are, with whoever the lead writers are, in order to maintain that integrity? Or do you think that or do you think that we should continue doing what we are doing, which is basically buying the rights to individual works and then just having people do regular adaptations to them?
You see, I don't know if I would say the responsibility of the writer, because I feel like most people who write material, they want to be involved in the process, but then the studio shut them out.
That's
Um,
also super true. That's very true.
I think it wasn't a book adaptation show, but did you see the show episodes?
Yes. Yes.
So the scenes in the beginning where they're trying to adapt this show, I guess throughout the whole, at least first season, where they're trying to adapt the show and the studio keeps coming in and changing it. And it goes from being
Yes.
like an intelligent show to like he's a gym teacher.
Yes.
So I feel like that's so real. And I think that if you're a writer and you own material, you want it to stay true to what you've written because you love it so much and you don't really, but at the same time, everybody wants control and then there becomes too many too many cooks in the kitchen, as you will.
Right. And
So
and I feel, honestly, I feel like this is what happened with the and again, I know we're talking about series, but there's a great segue to this actually coming up this coming week. Um the Anne Rice Vampire Lestat movies were, I mean, individually, maybe some of them are watchable, but it's a train wreck because it doesn't even. First of all, Anne Rice's work, it they're the books are absolutely unbelievably complex and rich, and the storytelling that goes into them deserves a lot more than what the storytelling through the movies represented, which was just, very watered down and very down and dirty sort of representation of the vampire Lestat. I don't know, it never sat well with me. Now, they're going to try to correct that with a series coming up called The Vampire Lestat, where they're going to pay attention quite a bit to the relationship between Lestat and Louis, and also what they're trying to do is make something a little bit more authentic to the Anne Rice experience. But they've done it in a way that now, a bunch of fans are like, well, how can you do this? Because they've changed up who the characters are. In fact, Louis is black, and people are like, you can't
You
do
never
that.
hate that.
Yeah, that you can't do that. That's terrible. Why would you do that?
Why
And
would you have black people in TV shows?
and they've also changed up the timeline a little bit, and that just threw people, but I'm going to go back to Wheel of Time and say, listen, I was reading Wheel of Time a long time ago, and I absolutely fell in love with every single book in the Wheel of Time series. I Every time a new book would come out, I was so excited. And the first season of Wheel of Time threw me sort of upside down in a almost in a fan tizzy about why did they change this, and what were they doing, what is it, what. And then I really, maybe 3 episodes in, stopped thinking that way and started really enjoying the fact that what Wheel of Time is is all represented in their narrative, despite the fact that they've changed things up. That, in other words, like, it is still just as enjoyable to watch. The main story is still being told, and that I'm basically just ruining my own experience with the show by expecting something that I feel like maybe I don't need to. Now, I'm not saying that this is true for every single series, um, because I do think that there are some that are just way off the rails. But let's not, we'll go into that in a second. Let's talk about Handmaid's Tale. Have you guys both watched Handmaid's Tale at all?
No.
I have seen all of it. I haven't seen the new season because I'm kind of waiting, but I'm
Okay.
obsessed with it.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a second then. Handmaid's Tale, to me, is one of the better adaptations in the sense that it's taken core work and really added complexity and layers and dimensions and given us new characters that I would never have envisioned, but that really work in the setting. Did you read the book, or did you read the material that is Handmaid's Tale, Betty?
So I read the first half of the book, and it was a little difficult to get through, partly because I can't close my eyes while I'm reading a book.
Oh yeah,
Um,
well, that's a good point.
but so I think the book, the first part of the series, did a very good adaptation of what the book itself was, and then added a lot of meat to it. And
Um,
so, for instance, Yvonne Strahovski, like her character in that, I don't remember her character being in that book very much, but that is one of my favorite characters. Her and Aunt Lydia are brilliant actresses. So,
right.
and then I also read I did read the Testament, which was really amazing. And I'm really hoping that they start tying in those coming stories into the series, because that would
Right.
be a lot of, I hate to say the word fun because it's so intense. Um, but I think that adaptation is brilliant. I think everyone involved in that is brilliant.
But, amazingly, we haven't even really gotten to the Testaments, right? We're not even at that point with the series. I I mean, I guess, well, No, we're really not. We really haven't seen the stuff that is in the Testaments in The Handmaid's Tale at all. The series itself is running a very l- protracted timeline of the story that is The Handmaid's Tale. And that's what I'm saying. Like, there's so much that's in The Handmaid's Tale, the series, that is not in the book, but it honors the book and it is just as compelling and amazingly written, like really, really good stuff, good television altogether. Um, and I don't feel, I mean, I don't know about you. How do you feel about it? Do you feel like they are doing a good job telling the story, or do you feel like, oh, why are they going in all these different directions when there's no justification for it in the book?
You mean all the different directions in Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. I really have no bad things to say about it. I think that the book itself is so small. So if they weren't going to, and Testaments didn't come out until after the series had already been on for a few seasons.
Right.
So I think that if they had not added to it, then there would be no show.
Right.
And
I do think, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I don't know how much the writer had to do with the actual show, but I'm pretty sure she's Margaret Atwood. I'm pretty sure she approves of it.
So, okay. So, have either of you guys watched a series of unfortunate events, the one with Neil Patrick Harris as Count Olaf?
Yes.
I haven't seen a lot of it.
Okay. So,
Also,
Josh,
I would like to
It's
add
my
one thing.
time.
I would like to add one thing.
yeah.
I think that A Handmaid's Tale is so depressing that if they did not start going off in these other directions and give us something to at least hope for, that I think we would lose viewers because we need to have something
Hmm.
to like someone to root for and something to have hope, if that makes sense.
I do, and
Okay.
it is one of those. I do think it is one of those instances where, um, and I have to well, I'll give you a different take on a series that I just talked about a second ago, but let me go to Josh first. Josh, tell me, what did you think about, okay, first of all, let's start with this. Have you read any of the A Series of Unfortunate Events?
I have not.
Okay. So so really you're basing your understanding of the source material on just sort of like what you know about the source material, right?
Yeah, and what's been floating around there, plus the film with Jim Carrey back in the day.
Um, so A Series of Unfortunate Events has how many books? Uh, oh
8,
gosh,
I want to say.
I is it 8 or is it actually? I feel like it was more. It's quite a few. It is definitely quite a few. Um, but if you read A Series of Unfortunate Events, as I did because I bought them for my kids, one of the things that you understand,
13.
thank you, 13. One of the things that you understand is each one of the books is kind of, they're small, so they're not, they're not big long stories, but they are self-contained. They're very self-contained. And although the story series narrates this like really long adventure, um, it's easy for each individual story to be told by itself. The series, and the Netflix series, I'm specifically talking about the Neil Patrick Harris starring as Count Olaf series.
Hmm.
Um, it, I would love to hear from you what you thought about how that was, what you think about that adaptation. I mean, I realize that you haven't read the stories, but do you think that, does it feel like it honored the material, or do you think that in this case maybe they could have made it a little bit shorter.
I loved almost every moment in that series. It was from beginning to end very enjoyable. It really figured out how to play with your emotions and your expectations, and I absolutely loved every performance from every character. It's one of those shows that I've watched through twice now, and the fact that it's a show I can sit with the kids and we sort of have the same reactions to everything that's going on in the world, especially when injustices are perpetrated, and you really feel for the Baudelaire kids. It's everything about the Netflix series, in my opinion, is absolutely wonderful.
I definitely think that that they did a good job, including one of my favorite episodes in the Hostel Hospital. I particularly was very fond of that. I thought that was so well done and such a good translation, because what I remember reading from the book seemed like they had done a really good job trying to bring that to life. It was supposed to be super scary, and I really feel like they made it that way. One of the lesser uh, mm, brought to light narrative plots was the VFD. And they did do some with it, but they didn't do as much with it as was in the books. And I feel like I understand why, because then that kind of it moves into new territory, and then it really opens up quite a bit more. But overall, I think Lemony Snicket did a good job. That series did a really good job of translating the source material into the series. So okay, so let's talk for a second about books and series that didn't get translated well, because that's the one that I think is where most people have gripes. When it's done well, it's done well. Oh God, you know what? I didn't talk about Sandman. I got to talk about Sandman first. The done well is Sandman. Um, it, I touched a little bit on why I thought it was so good, but I have to say one other thing about it. The most important thing to me when a series is adapted from a book is not necessarily that they authentically show us every single thing in the book. It's that they don't change the tone of the book in order to fit some narrative that maybe doesn't really have much of a plot moving forward, because that sort of cuts everything off and makes it impossible to move forward. And Sandman did something so interesting where when I say that they changed the principal characters, I mean they changed Death. They gave Morpheus a really different look, which I actually really loved. They picked up on some of the really like small but essential feelings that are in Sandman and brought them to life in a way that is only sort of hinted at in the graphic novels. And that makes me really happy, because that's the reason that I kept reading those novels in the first place. Was there are all of these subtle nuances, and only a series creator who is so intimate and familiar and passionate about the art would be able to pick that up. Um, Okay, so let's talk about some series that weren't really all that great. Let me ask you guys, do you have anything that you think was based on a book, brought to series, but wow, it really flopped? Any
I think it
ideas?
would be a little difficult to come up with that because if they flopped, they're not really, you know, known.
Oh,
But
I disagree. Infamy is a thing. I mean, for sure. I'll give you some examples.
well, the
But
first thing that comes to my mind is and someone's gonna hurt me for this one, but I gotta say it. Dexter.
Hmm.
There's a
I
show
will
that
fight you. Like I will physically fight you. I don't care how much bigger you are than me. That show is so good.
don't interrupt, please.
I will fight you.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
That that's a show that got the ball and you know, to use a football analogy, got it all the way down to the end of the field and then just dropped it
Hmm.
twice. When the original series ended, they were doing this, you know, some for some reason, Deb and Dexter, oh, we're in love now. What? No, that's no. And then they just completely dropped the ball on closing it out. And then when they bring it back for New Blood, they were right there. They were so close to giving it the ending it needed. But I'm not saying it shouldn't have ended the way it did. I'm just saying it went from, oh, okay, we have the setup for another good season to, and we're done.
Right. Right.
Okay, I agree. I agree with that.
So it's not that I'm saying Dexter was a notoriously bad show throughout its run. I'm saying that when it comes to the characters, when it comes to uh, pushing to the end, it's a show that never figured out how to say goodbye, and that is, in my opinion, very detrimental to storytelling. If you don't know how to close your show, it's the lasting impression that you leave people.
Right. Right.
So if you bunk that, it does taint everything that came before it.
Yeah,
Which
because I didn't even like honestly, I watched a couple of the episodes of the new series and I just stopped watching because like let's face it, I was watching it to see what happened with Yvonne Strahovski's character because I'm
so
obsessed.
okay, so I'll go next with a slightly controversial one, and then Betty, tell me what you think. I Although I like the series for the cheesiness of the series, it's definitely not book material. Outlander. It did not translate to the series in any way. It wasn't it was it was not telling the story that is Outlander. It is telling a different story, and it is a good story, but it is not telling that story. It's a little I feel like it's kind of like riding on the coattails of somebody else's fame, and you end up being really talented and so good, but you're still riding on somebody else's coattails of fame. So, what do you think, Betty? What kind of oh, I got another good one too. What series disappointed you that came from a book series? Any?
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute.
Whoops.
Um, I don't know. I'm gonna maybe say Orange is the New Black for similar reasons that Josh had
Hmm.
um with Dexter. The ending was so bad and like Genji doesn't know how to do apparently end a series without wrecking it.
Ah.
And also, I mean, you have a lot of things in that, like, you have a lot of things that happen to different characters that didn't happen that they showed happen to Piper and things like that. So, um, and then of course they had to extend it because it only lasted a short time. Like it was a short book. Um, and and I do like how they made it about lesbians because in
Mhm.
real life she married her fiance. Um, So yeah, I think that they jumped the shark on that one, and it could have ended much better, but they kept upping the ante. In the part where they ate the live rats, baby rats,
Oh
like
god, that was awful.
it still haunts me to this day. It was unnecessary.
I don't know if you guys have seen any of this, but I am going to also choose the Shannara Chronicles as being just a horrible adaptation. Um, Shannara as a book series, it was by Terry Brooks, and it was decent. It was passable. It was good on the level of, hey, here's some meat and potatoes fantasy, so it was good. But the adaptation was back when this was a thing, we used to have a verb for TV shows that did this. We called the TV shows CW'd. Oh, they CW'd that TV show. And basically, what they did was they took everything that was good about an idea and they distilled it down to rampaging teenagers or teenagers that didn't have a clue about what they were doing.
I'm
And
assuming that that's based on the actual shows or the actual CW network.
Yes, yes, it actually is because that's what
That's
the
hilarious.
CW did, right? I mean, like it
Yeah.
took all of these really great ideas and it basically just put teenagers into them and said, "Hey, here, like this." And I mean, sometimes it worked, and sometimes it really didn't. Like, the Vampire Diaries was super interesting forever, but that was the CW written all over it, right? And then the next one that came after it was awful. It was just terrible. Um, the if we move out of sort of like what makes us comfortable about a book adaptation, I think what we find is you can't just use the book as, okay, here's the backdrop, everybody's going to love it because it's the book. You have to actually put work into it. Like you have to actually give the the whole cycle a bit of thought. It needs to feel as if it belongs in the series format. It can't just be one long rambling exercise of storytelling. People don't like that. They get very upset with it. I will point it case in point right now to two shows that are vying for sort of like the top privilege of being the most seen, and right now, House of the Dragon is winning. House of the Dragon does this thing that I hate. Um, Rings of Power does this thing that I kind of love. And it's not just because I'm partial to Tolkien, although I am. Um, Rings of Power,
Hmm.
each episode, yeah, I know. Nobody, everybody who knows me is going, yeah, right. Um, Rings of Power begins and has sort of like episodic cycles in little pieces here and there, but each one tells a has a beginning, middle, and end, and so we close each episode with, I mean, yes, a little bit of a cliffhanger, but basically we're thirsting for a little bit more information because it closes in a way that makes us feel like, okay, fade, the lights go down, we'll see you next week. House of the Dragon does these good but really off-putting for a series episodic moments of like, whoa, brilliant storytelling here, but it's so incredibly out of the beginning, middle, and end. The acts don't feel like they fit together. The acts feel like they are everyone vying for kind of like the top dog in the same episode. And it doesn't feel right. It starts feeling like the epic itself is taking on its own battle to see which of the epics can be more important. And that doesn't I get why they're doing it, but it's uncomfortable. Whereas Rings of Power has a much more settled and this feeling of, that there is an act 1, act 2, and a closing act, even when we have multiple pieces of storytelling happening, because right now, especially in Rings of Power, they're in multiple different locations. They have many different characters. There's lots of different stories that we're following. But when they start telling the story, you don't get the sense that you're just going to see a clip of something and then you're never going to go back to it, or that it's going to be completely and totally untouched for the rest of the episode. That's what happens in House of the Dragon. Now, I'm not comparing just the two of them to what makes everything else successful in terms of a series, but I do think that, especially in when we bring stuff in from the book format, there has to be a sense of awareness that the writers or that the writing team has about the format that they're using, which is the television series. It's not one long movie. Episodically, despite the fact that people can stream, your episode 1, episode 2, and episode 3 still have to feel like they are part of the series format. And that's why I think sometimes books don't always translate the best into a series. Um I was recently thinking about the ideas that we have behind, like Dexter, like Handmaid's Tale, and how we have formed our ideas about what is appropriate storytelling in those. And I'll tell you, if I go to a Dexter episode, I know that there's a beginning, middle, and end. I absolutely feel it. It exists inside of each episode. If I jump over to Handmaid's Tale, it's slightly more eroded, but it's there. Um, but then there's shows like, especially Game of Thrones episodes, the original Game of Thrones episodes, where they just threw storytelling out the window after season 3 and made it just one long giant saga. And I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Do you feel like does that help or does that hurt?
I guess it depends on how it's done. I think it seems like Pretty Little Liars and Queen's Gambit were
Mm.
both similar to that, and I loved them.
Okay, but I'll make a differentiation there. And I'll say that both of them were a bit more like soap opera storytelling than they were episodic serial storytelling. Do you know what I mean?
I do and I don't. Um, but
So,
I think
in a go ahead.
I'll just say because of the material in Queen's Gambit, I think it actually did a really great job at containing containing it episodically while also telling the true story and changing just enough to where it wasn't too horrifying. Um, like not turning her friend into a sexual abuser kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, but it I'm trying to remember it because it has been a little while since I've seen it. It seemed to go carry on through, so it didn't seem like it was episode. It didn't seem like it was. It was enough to want you to watch the next episode and the next episode.
Okay, so slight clarification. There is something about episodic serial television which is supposed to make you want to queue up the next episode, right? You're supposed to want that. And
Right.
I believe that all of the shows that we talked about tonight strive for that. Definitely. Where I feel like the book to series part plays into this is, books are meant to pretty much have plots, subplots, and they arch over, 500, 600 pages inside of a book. So your beginning, middle, and end vary in terms of whether you're talking about the major plot, or whether you're talking about the minor plots, or how you are thinking about the character arcs that are happening and where they sort of fall on that line. But basically, you have a beginning, middle, and end. What I'm saying is, sometimes I think storytelling in serial episodes lose the beginning, middle, and end because they're telling the story of a book that has a beginning, middle, and end, but the squishy insides make it very difficult for screenwriters to come up with that golden formula. Um, the first season of The Witcher just seems to peg it perfectly. Like each episode works with strong open and strong close. So much so that it just feels like it's a self contained event. And that's great. I mean, I love that. It doesn't make me not want to queue up the next episode because there's all kinds of things that are hanging on what has closed at that episodic finale. But then that's why you want to go to the next episode. But some series don't seem to grab that. And so as a result, you have a bit more of a rambling story. Even when it's trying to go someplace, it's not able to actually get there. Um, did either of you guys see the television series Legion that was based on? Josh, did
No,
you see Legion? You
I
didn't
did
see.
not.
Oh,
I
well,
did not.
okay. Josh, you in particular need to watch Legion. I mean, as a superhero story, he is one of the most powerful of all superheroes of all time. And the series really gets into why that is happening. And it's amazing. I didn't even understand his origin story until after I watched it. It's an unbelievable series. Okay, Legion begins very confusing, just like the character is very confused. And it does a really good job of episode to episode making sure that we understand that there are things happening here that we aren't supposed to understand. But it always ends with a wink to us that, hey, we're making progress. Here's where we're going. And I feel like that's one storytelling technique that you could use to maintain that sense of, hey, we've got continuity happening here. It's not just one giant mushed together story. Um, and I'm kind of struggling with like some others because a lot of our serial entertainment, especially stuff that's like crime procedurals, and they don't tell big stories, or they tell big stories but they tell them over multiple seasons. So it's almost impossible to see beginning, middle, and end. The episodes themselves tackle some issue, and that does have a beginning, middle, and end. But those aren't, crime procedurals are not usually book based. And that's where I think we have the disconnect. Just as one more example, did either of you guys see Hannibal? The series
Oh
Hannibal
yeah,
with,
it's incredible.
okay. Did you see Hannibal, Josh?
Hannibal?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Betty, what did you think about Hannibal as a series?
Um, I thought it was a great series. All the characters were fantastic. They worked well together. Um, we've spoken about Will and Hannibal's obvious a love affair with each other.
Right?
It was dark and quirky, and I thought it was fantastic. I don't think I have any complaints about it. I have to cover my eyes on that one too, but I loved it.
Mm, I did too. I thought Hannibal's actually one of my most favorite series,
I could
pretty
definitely
much
say
ever.
it's yeah, I can agree with that. It's amazing. Like it's yeah, it's all the good things.
Other than Black Sails, it's one of the few series that I will actually watch again in its entirety. Okay, this is one case where they took the material by Thomas Harris, contained in a couple of books, and we only just barely touched on Silence of the Lambs, barely, because we know that Will Graham is really just a central principal character in Red Dragon. So we sort of didn't even get to the real Silence of the Lambs. But the writers were able to take brilliantly the story from Thomas Harris and cast it into this unbelievable story that just swam with richness. I mean, it's hard. I feel like you cannot possibly understate how detailed and how rich the world of Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham was through that series. It's absolutely breathtaking. But what makes it, I think, so good from the book is that they kept all of the awesomeness of who Hannibal Lecter was and what Will Graham was supposed to be, and they didn't marginalize either. In fact, they wove a bigger, wider tapestry around them than the book ever did. And that's what made it successful.
Right, like they didn't water them down. Hannibal is still sadistic,
Right.
and everything bad about him is still bad, and you still like him. Um,
So the storytelling events became less important than the actual who are these characters and why are they interesting. And I mean personally, I think that is one good way of making compelling story from books. You don't always have to pick up the story and just make the story told verbatim. Sometimes it really can be about who the characters are because that character study is super interesting. Honestly, I feel like that's what they did in Handmaid's Tale too. They took
yeah, but
yeah,
they
they took
also, from what I heard, they also wanted to bring in Silence of the Lambs. They wanted to extend Hannibal, but they
right,
lost character.
right.
They were going to do a CBS show, and
The
I'm
plan
really
was
disappointed because I think that would have been really fantastic as well, like to bring in that other character and
right.
whatever her name was. I can't remember. Clarice.
Clarice Starling. The plan was for them to do that, but they left it with Hannibal and Will falling off the cliff, which
Right.
honestly is okay. I'm okay with that.
But
I'm
they were
okay
talking
with
about
it
bringing it
ending.
back and doing that, so
Right.
which would have been
I
nice just to have the series again.
although honestly, I feel like a lot of other series that I've seen that captured a moment in time, a magic that I don't know if I would want to recreate. There are some series that I feel like, oh, we should absolutely redo these series because we have better VFX, because we have, you know, bigger and bolder storytelling techniques now, bigger budgets to make things happen. But then there are some that just sort of, no, I don't want you to redo it because selfishly, I love them so much that they have this very unique place in my mind that I don't want to have replaced by something else. I know that sounds ridiculous, but
No,
th-
honestly, like I thought I wanted Gilmore Girls so bad for so long, but then they rushed the Year in the Life series and it was terrible and now we have to live with that forever.
right, right. And it because it replaces the canon. It replaces the actual like in your head what happened to these characters and yeah, I'd rather be stuck with the ambiguous I don't know what happened than have to have some kind of final pronouncement that doesn't meet my expectations. So, I know that that sounds ridiculous, but it's that's a thing.
No, I
Um
agree.
but so before we go, I did want to ask you guys one last question. I'm sorry, I know I talked a lot in this episode. But I wanted to ask you guys the question of if you have read a book that you think would make an excellent TV series. Not necessarily, a movie. Movies are a totally different animal. Something that could be adapted that would have a long lasting footprint on our entertainment. Let's start with you, Josh. Do you have a book that you think would, or a series of books?
Actually, yes. I'm going to start this off by saying that there are a lot of ways to bring books to life via television. And most recently, I think the trend has been to do just a miniseries where they tell the story of the book in a very, like you said, beginning, middle, end format, and don't really worry about trying to extend the story. But there
Right.
are
There isn't a
other,
lot of authenticity. Is that what you're saying?
well, it depends on like 11/22/63 uh, made some changes to the story, but overall, it still told the story.
and was not good, in my
But
opinion.
there are other series like MASH, that of course they strayed from the source material because I mean the show lasted longer than the war itself, so
Hmm.
they had to fill it with something, and then luckily they took um, the characters that were created by the author and were able to create more and more situations to keep the show entertaining and just loved almost universally. So, with that being said, because I know some people will take my idea and maybe be upset about it, but I would hope
Hmm.
they would go think of it more in the mash kind of mindset of taking the characters. Sure, you can tell the story from the books, uh, but if you want to keep the series going, you're going to have to create new adventures, and I don't think Douglas Adams would mind at all. The Hitchhiker's Guide, I think, would be a great sci-fi series to add to any network portfolio.
I was
Just
going to say that one.
just the adventures of Ford and Arthur.
I think that
And
would be fantastic because like the movie was so bad, and I think it's such good material.
yeah, every time they try to adapt Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I feel like either they're sending this work out to be done by people who don't really love this work, or don't understand it, because I don't find the right levels of sarcasm and the right levels of just absolutely. Douglas Adams was absolutely just a brilliant writer, but not just was he brilliant at writing, he captured something that
Hmm.
no adaptation has ever, in my opinion. It just hasn't been able to do it. So you're right. I think that actually could work. I think it could work in a similar way to Doctor Who, where it's just like, or like Supernatural, right? Where it's like they have a an episode. There is a theme to each episode, and
Right.
whatever their adventure is, that's what they're off to go do.
And it could be so random just because of the source material. It would be well, it has to be incredibly British, by the way.
Absolutely. That's why I went with Doctor Who as an example.
And that's my pick.
Good. That's a good one. I like it. Well, I'm sorry that Josh stole yours, but do you have a different one, Betty?
Yes, I'm going to go with Anxious People by Frederick Backman. I think it's a
Oh,
relatively newish book. Um, and it's
what's it
about
about?
how it's about so a man robs a bank and then it goes wrong. And so the bank robber goes missing out of like they run into an apartment and there's people there viewing an apartment and the bank robber goes missing. And so it's the job of the police to find out what happened and how this bank robber got out, even though they were outside waiting for them. So in that story, it tells the backstories of all of the people that were in the apartment with the robber and all the things that happened. And then it culminates at the end of the story where you find out who, what, where, why kind of things. Um, and it was very well done. It was amazingly written. And I think it would be really a really great series if you did um, maybe an episode for each character, and then you had a tying, sort of like they do Skins in the UK, where they each
Mm,
episode is about the character, and then at the end they all come together at the end. And that's one of those shows where you could also make it, you could add people or take away people, I guess, um, if they could make it true to the series. But I think it would be very interesting because it's also like it's also a mystery.
that sounds good. That
Yeah, it
actually
would.
sounds really good.
Yeah, the book is a. I really loved the book, so I think it would be, and I think it would be a great series.
Um, I would go with the story that actually it came out in 2020. It's called The Midnight Library. I really
Jen,
love yeah. Oh, did you guys lose me? Am I here?
No, you're still here.
Oh, good. Oh, I thought you were calling me. I really love the Midnight Library for a lot of different reasons, but one is it deals with time travel, by the way. But
you
the
know it's my
story
favorite.
itself, what?
You know that's my favorite. I love time travel.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I think you would actually enjoy it. There are so many different outcomes that I feel like a writer could pick up and move anything that they wanted to in terms of placement in the narrative and come up with something absolutely cool to watch. It would be really 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 enjoyable, so that would be my pick. I'm sure I have others too, but that would be my main one. I will say, just as kind of honorable mention, his Dark Materials, which is the book that is sort of like what we got the Golden Compass from, has been doing just kicking it out of the park in terms of being faithful to the material. They've changed some things, but faithful to the material, meaning like I feel like Liza is absolutely Liza. I feel like the world of Dust is absolutely that world. They have really gone out of their way to make it feel like this is the place from the book. I feel absolutely at home in his Dark Materials, just like I did when I read the book. So
You
I
know
give
what?
them a big.
Um, I think I feel like it's sort of online with that. I think if they took some David McCullough books, like the Brooklyn Building of the Brooklyn Bridge, and made that
Mhm.
a series, not like not like the documentaries they do, but if they made it stories and gave lives to these people, I think people would be very interested in learning about some of these historical events that were happening at the same
I,
time.
I'll give you an example of how this worked really well. My kid and I, every Thursday night, watched this I don't know what to call it, speculative fiction story about the building of the Colosseum in Rome. And it wasn't just the building of the Colosseum, it was the Colosseum was basically the character in the central part of the documentary. But it wasn't just a documentary, it was each week, depending upon what the topic was, we were introduced to a cast of characters, and those cast of characters became really important. Like you were really either rooting for them or absolutely hated them or whatever. And it was good. Like it was good storytelling. I was very impressed by it. And I don't know. I have so many books on ancient Rome in my library, and even I learned a bunch of new things. So it was super well done, very entertaining. And that, I
You need to
think
know how
you're
to
right.
watch
That could work. Like if you did that same idea about a medieval castle, that could totally work.
that. That'd be so
Um,
good.
right? Or the building of a cathedral. I mean, okay, Pillars of the Earth, but if you told the story of the cathedral from the point of view of the cathedral and all the people who moved in and out of it, even, from its building and then all of the subsequent uses, it's just amazing. You could tell a very rich story. So
I would love that.
absolutely, totally behind that. I feel like that is absolutely a good idea.
We're
And,
geniuses.
we really may end up getting a lot more of that because let's face it, History and Discovery Plus are moving in very similar lines, I think, trying to bring more of that kind of storytelling forward. It's the one that's about the Colosseum clearly had some pretty big production values. So it was not an inexpensive show to put together, but I feel like it was still a whole lot less than putting together a season of any uh television show that I have seen recently. So there might be like a glimmer of hope in there because even though it's expensive to put together those small pieces are small in comparison to the overall, big part, which is,
Well,
showing.
the so Gangs of New York, Boss Tweed in that
Uh-huh.
was a real character, and one of the reasons why the Brooklyn Bridge was having such difficulty getting made because that was part of the scheme of buying materials.
Right, right.
So, I think the Brooklyn Bridge itself would be an amazing story.
It absolutely would be. I
Yeah.
completely agree. And all of the stories that sort of like satellite around that
Oh, yeah.
are amazing stories because they're stories of immigration, they're stories of human engineering, they're stories of it's not just there is
And death.
something
People die,
I,
so
right. There's something iconic about telling stories of history when you hit on the right history to sort of give that platform to. Not everybody is a history buff like we are, but I do think that when you tell it in these exciting little vignettes, you really do get people fired up and interested. So,
and
so
they need to take, I know they've discussed it, but I really wanna see them take the Gilded Age characters and take them to Rhode Island and, so
oh,
they can see their
right.
mansions there.
Yeah, I kind of hope that they do that in this next coming season. I mean, we were teased a little
Yes, that's
bit,
why I'm
right?
thinking that it could happen.
So, yeah, I hope so too. There's a whole lot more to tell in that story. I'm really glad that that got another season as well. I will say in closing, that while we're talking about books making their way into series adaptations, it, there are a lot of books out there that could be adapted to a TV series. I don't think that every single book warrants the long format of a television series. And I don't even know if everyone would be interested. But I will say that it does feel like there is a lot more risk taking. And I say that, kind of tongue in cheek. Risk taking meaning riskier ideas about what will sell and what doesn't sell now as opposed to even 10 years ago. So, while the world of streaming content sometimes seems like, oh, there's not really that much coming out, there really is. There is a lot of content coming out. And where do we get all of these ideas if not from fully formed ideas that come from already written material? It really is kind of like, giving yourself a step stool to launch a bigger piece of content. And yeah, I feel like this could really be something good. Um, okay, so I'm gonna close out the podcast here by saying that next week we are going to talk about, we're going to actually switch up our different weeks here because next week we're going to talk about what's so funny. And I have a specific reason for talking about this. There's some new things that are coming out in the coming next couple, well, in the next couple of weeks, that are big comedy events. And I really want to have some discussions about what it is that comedy is sort of, why is comedy so divisive right now? And how are we perceiving our comedy? Is what we found funny 10 years ago funny today? No. But what is it about what's being represented that we're finding objectionable? And let's have like a real big person conversation about that stuff. I do also definitely want to give a huge shout out to Tori. I know Tori. Sorry you couldn't be here for tonight's episode, but I know that you'll have stuff to bring to the table next week. And again, I hope that that ends up being a good episode. Um, Josh, how can we find you on social media? And thank you so much for joining us on tonight's podcast. I really appreciate it.
No problem. No problem. You can always go to wadcomedia.com where all the pertinent social links are available.
I would prefer
And
he hadn't.
you can find me on Twitter at SkidComic. And if you want to listen to me once again this week, there's tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on the Wadcast, episode number 106. What's it going to be about? I don't know. I just know Brandon won't be there. So I'll figure it out.
And then also, don't forget to join Josh and myself on our podcast that we do every Wednesday night, 10 to 1, where, let's see, next week's episode is going to be, about our favorite Halloween movies.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't talk about
not just
Hocus
Halloween.
Pocus, people are going to riot.
People are going to write about what?
If you don't mention Hocus Pocus.
Oh, that part of the reason that I actually chose that topic for next week, I even told that to Josh, was Hocus Pocus coming out tomorrow.
Fun fact.
That's exciting.
I've never seen it.
Fun fact. Why are you a loser?
Ooh, oh wow.
I
Josh,
am
you
a
really should. Your kids would love Hocus Pocus.
I'm sure they've seen it.
You call yourself my brother?
As little as possible.
Well,
all right,
you're
Betty.
not allowed right now.
How can we find you on social media?
You can find me on TikTok or Instagram at Betty Chitty Bang Bang.
Very cool. Very cool. And you can find me over at moviesandmeals.com. I hope that you have a wonderful week. Again, if you are in any path of any inclement weather, please stay safe. Please join us again next week, and we'll see you soon.